Summer routines live or die by how easy they are, and honestly, if something takes too much effort, I'm out. That's why Groons is my go-to. It's my one daily pack of gummies covering my greens, vitamins, and minerals. Plus, it has 6 grams of prebiotic fiber, which is more than 2 cups of broccoli. No mixing powders, no giant pills, no hassle. I just rip open the pack and I'm done. They taste good and they make it easy to stay on top of my health, even when life gets busy. Save up to 52% with the code PODCAST at Groons.co. That's code PODCAST at GRUNS.co.
Welcome back to the Alec Lewis Show. I am your host, Alec Lewis. This is episode 173, back in Minnesota with the recording studio that you guys watching on YouTube and listening on Apple, Spotify, or iHeart are familiar with. If you don't know me, I'm Alec Lewis. I cover the Vikings for The Athletic. Every single day, we'll have a story on new GM Nolan Teasley Wednesday morning. So please look forward to that right before the press conference. And then we'll have much more from a practice later this week and some quarterback stuff. It never stops, and it never should, because we have a blast doing it. If you're new here watching on YouTube, please hit the subscribe button. It helps us out. If you're listening on Apple or Spotify or iHeart or wherever you get your podcast, you can rate and review, and all of that we really appreciate. You give us 5 stars. I think it's like a very small, takes 2 seconds, but it's fun for us. So thanks for doing it. On this show, as we do every week, or usually every week, early in the week, unless we have a pop-up guest, I answer questions from you guys. So a bunch of you on social media, where I have my account on Twitter at Alec_Lewis, passed along some questions, a bunch of similar topics, obviously GM related, decision making structure related, JJ McCarthy related, Kyler Murray related, Blake Brandel related. We're going to get into all of that over the course of this show, and appreciate those of you who passed along questions. The Alec Lewis Show is presented by First Resource Bank. If you don't know about it by now, I don't know what you've been doing, but they are a member FDIC bank in the Minneapolis area, run by really good people. Tim Siegley, Aaron Siegley, Charlie Anderson. These guys have visions of establishing a bank here in the Minneapolis community that is bar none the best. And I use their banking platform and have since I moved up here, and can't argue with what they're trying to build. And the fact that they're really good people and also Vikings fans helps out as well. They've supported us really from the beginning, and it's been awesome to watch them really grow as the show's grown as well. And then the Alec Lewis Show also it's been fun to partner with Presen Athletics. If you don't know about it, 3 guys, Kurt, Graham, and Tanner, they got together and they're like, look, how can we improve, grow, establish really like an undercurrent of youth football development in Minnesota? I saw late June, they're having what they're calling an offensive skill camp, bringing in former college players to kind of help, mentor kids. So if you have a son who plays football, wants to play football, friends, kids who play football and want to play in high school and potentially college, I highly would recommend you guys going to check out Presen. So that will do it. All right, let's get right into questions. You guys have listened to me ramble for 3 minutes, so we'll just hop right into it. And the question that we will begin with is from Nate. Nate says, and this is a long question, he had to send me a screenshot. The Wilfs have relayed the new power dynamic consists of 3 experts in their field. It would be fair to name this organizational structure the triumvirate of experts, or TOE. I am not going to do that, Nate. Anybody can call it whatever they want to call it. I will listen to the Wilfs talk on Wednesday and outline it themselves. Continues to say, like with every set of TOE, you need one toe, a dominant toe. Who will be the big toe as far as the head decision maker? So this was a conversation, a question that, a lot of people had, and going back to compare what the Vikings have constructed from a structural standpoint of decision making to what they constructed 20 years ago with what they called, ownership called at the time, the triangle of authority. And so I went back into the archives and I'm reading Star Tribune newspaper stories written by my guy I work with almost every day, essentially Kevin Seifert of ESPN, and he documented the triangle of authority kind of structure and timeline, as well as anyone that I could find. So if you're a younger fan, you don't know about it. You're kind of walking through this experience of knowledge, just like I was. But essentially, when the Wilfs bought the team in 2006, early on, they established what they called the Triangle Authority. Man, Kevin Seifert painted this scene of Ziggy Wilf, one of the Vikings owners, sitting at Interlochen Country Club using silverware to kind of outline where each executive / coach resided within that structure. And at the time, the top of the triangle, to continue with the analogy, was Coach Childress, and the bottom two rungs were Fran Foley, who was eventually hired, and Rob Brzezinski, obviously, who remains an integral piece of the organization. And I don't know how much this has been reported or whatever, but like what remains part of the irony of, looking back at that time is Fran Foley was hired, one of the potential candidates, and it makes sense just to like look back at it, who would have been available for the Vikings to hire as part of that structure. Is John Schneider, who is the GM, President Football Operations GM for the Seattle Seahawks. He was at the time an assistant to the GM in Green Bay. And so, 20 years later, to look back at this thing and to think through the iterations of what was and what is and what became, it's kind of, I don't know. It's a fascinating one, certainly, to recall and to reconsider and all of that. And then obviously Fran Foley flamed out very quickly. Rick Spielman was eventually hired, and I think there was a story that I read where Rick Spielman said that the Triangle of Authority naming device was a media creation. That's why I'm refraining from it, but it was not a media creation. Obviously, reading back through some of the stories, and I'll read. I thought, and we'll get to the question, Nate, and you guys listening are probably like, get to the point, and that's okay because we've got time here in the podcast. You guys are either washing dishes, working out, whatever you're doing, you're along for the ride. But I just think it's so important to recall some of the history of this stuff. And I was reading this Kevin Seifert story from the Star Tribune, January 7th, 2007, and there was this paragraph that I circled it. I just took a screenshot, and the paragraph is this: who ran the Vikings in 2006? It's an almost unanswerable question. According to Wilf, the Foley fiasco left Childress, who was in the coach, to take on more of a personnel role than anyone would have projected. Spielman spent the summer catching up, making it hard to believe that any football decisions were made without Childress's consent. And I guess as I read through that, like having covered this team now for 4 seasons, there is it's just wild that 20 years later, I do think you could just supplement the current iteration of names of what was last year with Kwesi Dofomitsa, Kevin O'Connell, etc., and you'd be hard pressed not to be able to just plug those names in and understand that, again, 19 years later, circumstances played out in a very similar fashion, which is, it's pretty wild. It's probably pretty telling as far as ownership goes. And you'd hope that 20 years in, after, somewhat of a replica in many ways, that this would be kind of the turning point of that structure. And we'll see. As far as like Nate's question, who is the big toe of what he wants to deem the TOE? I can't wait on Wednesday to hear what Mark Wilfs, whoever talks, Mark, any of the executives. I can't wait to hear what they have to say, and I imagine they will flesh this thing out even further. But I mean, for Nolan Teasley to leave the position that he had in Seattle as the assistant GM and John Schneider's kind of right-hand guy, to move out of the place and the town and the community that he grew up in and lived in his entire life. It's hard for me to fathom that you would do that without understanding and without the knowledge that you would have a massive amount of say within the decision-making structure. Now, I will say this because it's something I know about Nolan Teasley. Having talked to a lot of people around him, like, he is not the type of guy to enter the Vikings building and just unilaterally be tossing decisions all over the place and ensuring that his voice is heard at all times. Like, every description of this guy from people who have worked with him, from people who have worked, watched him work from afar, agents who have spent time around him, like, the description people use is a calm, patient, curious listener who doesn't have to be the vocal person in the room, doesn't have to get the credit at the end of the day. And so I don't think the Vikings are adding someone who is going to ensure or is going, not that he's not going to have a backbone to be able to make decisions, because I think, like, he's definitely charted certain courses in Seattle, but it's not going to have to be known through every decision that Nolan Teasley was the one who signed off. It's just not something that I think he's going to care about. And I imagine he's going to talk about that a little bit on Wednesday. This entire conversation, really, it brings me back to, one of the last comments Kwesi Adofo-Mensah ever made as the Vikings GM, and we can rehash everything, but I remember him saying towards the end of one of the press conferences, toward the very end, like, if you're asking the questions of who's making X decision and who signs off and who made this decision, like, you failed. And I think, like, you know, in many ways, I do think you need to know who is the final sign off. But in other ways, like, if you think about Seattle and you go through the decisions they've made to achieve the Super Bowl, whether it's the Sam Darnold signing, whether it's the draft picks of Devon Witherspoon and Byron Murphy II, it's really hard to discern, was that a John Schneider call? Was that a Mike McDonald head coaching call? Was that the front office's call with Nolan Teasley and Trent Kirshner and Matt Berry and Aaron Heinlein? Like, when you sift through all of the decisions that Seattle made, and they made a lot of them to supplement their roster without bottoming out to get to the Super Bowl and to win the Super Bowl, like, the credit just goes to the organization. And I think so much of that is because John Schneider, Seattle Seahawks GM, has established an infrastructure where he's hired people who don't care to get the credit. Like, they are as egoless as you can find in a league filled with ego and alphas, because that's just how it is. And so, like, I think one of Nolan Teasley's primary jobs here in entering the Vikings building is to establish that part of the culture. Like, I think true leaders in any walk of life, and I'm young, so you can argue with this, I'm sure, and I'm totally okay with it, but, like, true leaders want to hire people and then give them the latitude to be the experts in their craft. And, like, an example for Nolan Teasley is John Schneider at one point in recent years, they were talking about player development and how can they improve from a player development standpoint. So John Schneider, who has worked with Nolan Teasley for more than a decade, he's like, you know what, Nolan, why don't you get with certain people within the organization and try to build out a player development kind of system, structure, approach. And so he communicated with coaches, with performance staff, with psychology to try to build that type of infrastructure within their player development. And guess what? Like, you never heard about that. It was never, look at what Nolan Teasley did. Nolan Teasley's interviewing to tell you what he did. Like, no, that stuff was all private and has been private and would continue to be private if he was not the new Vikings general manager, and if people who respected him didn't want to try to talk about and tell you the impact that he made behind the scenes. And so, I guess, to answer this very long-winded first question, Like, the more the Vikings can get to a place of they've made an organizational decision that nobody's out gunning for credit over, I think the more you know, this organization is going to have a chance of getting to the place that the Seahawks have gotten twice in 15 years. And you hear all of these phrases, and I imagine we're going to hear all of them tomorrow on Wednesday, or you're listening to this on Wednesday. So today, the press conference might be over, and you might have already heard them. The synergy, the alignment, the collaboration, all of the words that sound so great. And at its very best, I totally understand why they are said, but to actually have those things come to life, you need the primary leader and leaders within your organization to evoke those types of characteristics. And so I think that's so much of like Nolan Teasley's challenge is to start to move this thing in a way where that's kind of the result. I'd be curious what you guys think about that. But I've done a lot of work in recent days talking about the Seahawks, listening to people talk about the Seahawks, what makes it so successful, why have they had such continuity but still been able to push things forward and use data and use performance science and be a place that players want to sign to because they maximize you. Like I think one of the themes among all of those conversations has been the way that John Schneider charts a course for the people he hires to have the latitude to make an impact without needing the credit on the back end. So long-winded there, but it's a really important one for me. And it's like, you guys who know me or have listened to me for a long time or have read my work for a long time, you know I love the roster stuff. I love talking quarterbacks, and we're about to get into some of that. I all of it is awesome. But like how the best who do this thing think and how structures are set up to allow organizations to thrive, like that is so much of my fascination. And so as much as I can hear about it, talk about it, take questions about it, I absolutely love doing it. Real quick before we get to some of the other questions that I promise I'm not going to go 10 minutes on. Shows also sponsored by Unreal. So Unreal, the clothing brand based in St. Paul, is from here. And they really, I mean, they've gone national. You might be able to say international with premium athleisure. I'm wearing the shorts right now. You guys, I'm not going to show them on camera because that would be kind of awkward. But yeah, I wear the hoodies all the time. I've got a package of clothes that I got the other day. They've got limited edition hoodie drops in the season that will make you look probably the coolest of the friend group if that's kind of your thing. But we appreciate their support from the beginning. And let's get to some more questions. All right, the next question comes from Ali Siddiqui, who asks, and I hope I'm pronouncing that right. I'm probably not, probably botching it. Who do you see the Vikings signing now that Allen's contract is off the books? He's talking about Jonathan Allen. And let me pull this up real quick just so you guys have a perspective because I think it's good. So the Vikings gained $12.5 million in cap room. This according to Jason Fitzgerald over the cap. $12.5 million in cap room with the release of Jonathan Allen and Harrison Smith. The Harrison Smith was kind of a more of a procedural thing. It has no indication on his return or lack thereof. And in Jason's write-up, the Vikings gained some much-needed cap room as they were only around $2 million in cap space prior to these transactions becoming official. So yeah, and Allen will count for $4.67 million in dead money in 27, but the team will receive an $8 million cap credit for his signing with the Bengals. So obviously, Ali, you want to know, what are they going to spend the money on? I also think it's important to mention that there's still a possibility. The Brian O'Neill, the Brian O'Neill extension. I think, if that were to happen, that would just create more cap space for the Vikings to use. It's part of the reason they've been as patient as they've been, or were as patient as they were throughout kind of the early part of free agency. But as far as the question, like I haven't been told that the Vikings are shopping around right now specifically for a specific player. And part of that is a byproduct of like they're transitioning a little bit from obviously from the front office perspective that we just talked about. And so I would imagine they want to get things up and going probably to where you're talking late July, to where these specific conversations are more pressing, and probably there's more on the table. Like I'd say the Jawan Jennings one got to a place from a money perspective where it was just a no-brainer for the Vikings to make happen, and so they did. As for everything else, I just kind of see it as picking up in a little bit. But the two places, and this is without information, so I'd say like I haven't heard specifically they're targeting these two spots. It's just very obvious. Any of you guys could look at the depth chart and make this declaration, but the two spots that I think you could see additions and it would make sense would be edge rusher for sure, and then safety as well. I mean, edge rusher, I've been over this, and I'll revisit it a little bit. The two starters make sense in Dallas Turner and Andrew Van Ginkel, but the depth there is just it's an immense fall off, even if the Vikings are transitioning Tyrion Ingram Dawkins, who they drafted last year, to become more of an edge type player. I mean, even then, like the depth in the fall off, if one of those two starters gets injured or doesn't produce, is so drastic and not sustainable, really, especially with the question marks everywhere else on the defensive line. So there's also a considerable amount of edge rushers available. So that's just going to be a spot. If nothing happens throughout, the rest of June and July, and we get to late July and camp starting, I mean, and that's a point where, players start to take visits and they're ready, they're getting eager to sign. Like, I'm not going to be, when I get the notification or a text that says X player is visiting the Vikings, who's an edge rusher, who's produced in the past, I mean, I will be less surprised than the sunburn on the top of my balding head, is probably what I say. And then safety, I mean, look, you've got Jay Ward, who really started to impress toward the back half of last season. I think he'll factor in for sure. You've still got Theo Jackson, who definitely just didn't shine throughout the season. Josh Metellus, who's kind of, again, he's more of kind of a box player, slot defender. And then Jacoby Thomas, who we'll see how much he can absorb of the system in the short term. But and then Harrison Smith, we'll see what happens there. But I just think, safety is a spot where Brian Flores and this Vikings defensive staff always has a keen eye for kind of just who to, what types of fits might make sense, and I'd say low cost players who they could potentially maximize. So those are the two places, Ali, that I've got my eyes on moving forward. Next question comes from Luke Garrison. Appreciate the question, Luke. With Carson Wentz re-signing, is it your understanding that the Vikings plan to have three quarterbacks on the active roster throughout the season? I mean, I'd say this, like, with the current setup in having Kyler Murray, JJ McCarthy, Carson Wentz, and Max Brosmer, I'd absolutely expect three quarterbacks to be on the active roster, including Carson Wentz. I mean, he doesn't sign here without an expectation of what's possible. And I mean, I'd say it is a pretty impressive luxury to have a player of his caliber, um, present for this entire camp, where you don't have to, or I'd say not camp, this entire summer and into training camp, where you don't have to disperse a ton of reps to him, and you can have full conviction that when the season happens, because he just showed this last year, he can step in and perform. Now, the level of performance, that's obviously, you can poke holes in that, and that's arguable and what have you. But as it's undeniable to say that he can't operate within the system in some form or fashion. And so, yeah, I mean, I think as long as the current slate of quarterbacks are on this roster, I'd fully expect three players to be on the active roster. So for sure. Next question comes from Rock NHL. Rock NHL. Is there any type of position battle for the center position? How should Vikings feel about Blake Brandel based off projection film last year. So I'll take these backwards. So I went back last week or 2 weeks ago, I think 2 weeks ago, and watched, I don't want to overstate it, probably 100 Blake Brandel snaps, just focusing on the center position. That's probably an insane thing to say. That's probably a ridiculous thing to do. But I care about you guys. I want to be able to provide perspective. And Blake Brandel, I thought, held his own in a lot of instances. I mean, he had never played the center position in his life. And the Vikings threw him in. I believe the first game was in London against a Cleveland Browns defensive front that was one of the better fronts in the NFL. And I thought he held his own. Were there a couple snaps, few snaps in each game where he gets edged by a really good defensive interior pass rusher? Absolutely. Like I'd say, and what I mean by edged is, he's pass protecting, and it's, a guy can kind of just find the way to his outside shoulder and squeeze past him and get upfield and get after the quarterback. Like that definitely happened. It happened in the Eagles game, certainly. And so that when he is in one-on-one pass rush situations, there is a little bit, or there was, let's say was a little bit of a vulnerability from that standpoint. I thought in the run phase, he looked solid. I thought getting out in screens, he seemed pretty aware. I thought from an operational standpoint, it wasn't just a complete mess. And that's a testament to his smarts. And I mean, he's been a guy, Blake Brandel has, who his entire career with the Vikings under Kevin O'Connell and this offensive staff, like they've liked him. They've thought of him as reliable. They've believed in him. Now, that's not to say that they view him as Tyler Linderbaum. Like it's just not, that's not realistic. But I think they feel like with more time, more development, more of a runway and practice at that specific position, the more that he can become a very suitable player, or I'd say not a very suitable player, like just a complementary piece to an offensive line that has a lot of talent. And so that's what I'd say. The other component that showed up on film that I think is critical, it's going to be critical to talk about for the entire offensive line, but just the ability to pass off stunts. That was an area that Ryan Kelly just really impressed me with, both in his time in Indy, watching the film when he got here, and then just in his few instances being here and playing. Like, there is a processing speed at the line of scrimmage that is often required, and guys are looping all over the place. And so I think that was an area that showed up as a little bit of a vulnerability, and how the Vikings coaching staff tries to maximize the offensive line against those types of looks in the 2026 season, I think is going to be a really important conversation. But as far as the question of, do I feel like it's a major position battle? I mean, look, it's always possible that Michael Juergens, who is a really intelligent and great dude, who is really well liked internally, just for like what he's about and the work ethic and all that stuff. Like it's always possible he takes a step and really pushes. But I'd say for me, the leader in the clubhouse right now would absolutely be Blake Brandel. So that's what I'd say. Let's rattle off a few quick ones. Douglas McClure, how secure is Miles Price as the primary returner? Who could provide competition for those spots in camp? I mean, I'd say, like, I want to see if they have Damon Claiborne back there as a kick returner. I mean, they have not been afraid to use running backs at that spot. I know that, like, they had Ty Chandler a little bit back there, and Damon Claiborne is just an absolute lightning bolt of a ball carrier. So I'll be curious there, but I would have to think Miles Price did enough. Yes, there was some security concerns over the course of the season, but the dynamism is pretty clear. And I mean, there were multiple instances, at least 3 or 4, where it was a block away or a flag away from breaking it and really changing the game. So I don't think you really want to mess with that unless it's, absolutely necessary. Let's see. Nick Howard, how serious a candidate was Rob Brzezinski for general manager? I mean, from my understanding, a very serious candidate, and understandably. Like, we talked about Rob a lot on the podcast, but it oversimplifies what Rob Brzezinski has meant and does mean to this organization to just say cap guy. Like, that is not the correct description of what Rob Brzezinski has been and is and will be. Like, he has been the point person with every agent who, there is a human component to this thing. Like, some of the more these agents trust the negotiator or respect the negotiator, the more likely it can be, even though this is never talked about, that a player does land with a certain organization. And Robert has done it with a credibility. And this is not me. Like, I've talked to a ton of agents about this, and Rob is highly, highly respected for the way he goes about it. Beyond that, like, beyond him being whatever, the cap guy and the primary negotiator, like, internally, he has been someone who, I mean, I'd say if you remove him from the building internally, or remove him from the day to day, like, he adds levity. He is someone that people can confide in. He understands what ownership wants and how different people operate and what works and what doesn't, because he's seen it for a long, long time. And so that bevy of experience, I don't think you can overstate what it has meant. I don't think you can overstate the job he did in a very odd and abnormal time for months, to be the interim throughout one of the most crucial time periods of this organization in recent years. And then I don't think you can overstate the handling of Nolan Teasley gets hired as the GM. And you haven't heard, I mean, in other instances, I guarantee you there would be leaks of guys frustrated. I mean, like, that's sometimes how it works. And so, yeah, I think, I've over this last 3 months, it's been very cool for me to talk to a lot of people in the league about, like, certain candidates and people and executives and who they respect and who they don't and why they respect them. And, like, Rob, and whether you're talking coaching agents, executive agents, player agents, executives in other buildings, GMs in other buildings, like, to a man and woman, they will tell you how much Rob Brzezinski, how highly he's thought of in the industry. And so, I mean, I'd say, if anything, the Vikings are really fortunate as an organization that they can proceed with this structure, including Rob Brzezinski. Like, and I don't say that for any other reason than that. I think that's the belief within the league. So yeah. Let's see here. Obviously, I said, there's a lot of JJ McCarthy questions here. Ryan Erickson asks, any possibility the Vikings trade McCarthy in training camp? Obviously, it's early, but they seem pretty high on Kyler and have Wentz as a reliable backup and Brosmer as their project. Also, this is him speaking, Ryan. JJ McCarthy seems pretty bitter. If they do trade JJ, what do you think they could get back? I mean, look, this is obviously aggregation station in terms of anything I say on JJ McCarthy, it's going to be blasted out or viewed one way or another in terms of however you want to view it, that's probably going to be how it's going to be. Like, I would say this, um, from what I understand with JJ McCarthy coming back in this spring and this summer, like, he's obviously been very motivated and has every reason to be motivated. I think from a throwing standpoint, he's definitely looked solid. Mechanics look smooth. The layering, he's obviously focused on. It's something that he wants to continue to improve on. The comments last week or what have you, I'd say, they definitely caught the eyes of people within the league. Like, so as much as it was made a big deal of, and I'd say if folks, if you are listening to this and you love JJ and you view those comments as, he's fired up, he's really motivated, this is what you want to see, or if you view the comments as this is a problem, what have you, like, I would just say that talking to people within the league, their eyebrows were raised by the comments and just the juxtaposition of them with how Kyler talked about it. That's what I'd say. But my conversations with people internally have not been about trade. They've not been about those comments. They've been about wanting to maximize the every single day on the field and making sure that that happens. And then the chips will fall how the chips fall. I will say this because it was mentioned by Ryan, like, yes, Kyler Murray is also really motivated. And it's not surprising to hear that he's looked good and that he's carried himself like a pro. I mean, like, I talked to Jordan Addison, who said he's a vet. He knows what he's doing. For all of the narratives around Kyler Murray, and there are a billion of them, and they are, I think, in many instances, very lazy narratives. Because when you talk to the people who really know him and have really been around him, it doesn't jive with what is often heard in the public. Like, the one thing about Kyler is he's been an accurate thrower of the football. He's thrown for 3,500 yards at the NFL level with the Cardinals team that hasn't had a great infrastructure 4 different times. And so the fact that he's impressed them behind the scenes, even though, with his smarts in terms of absorbing the system, with his accuracy on the field, with his, just style with teammates, like the Vikings, I know, have not been surprised at all that it has been as solid and impressive as it's been with Kyler thus far. And I mean, unless that changes, it's really hard to imagine any result other than the one that we've been talking about on this show and in my writing now for some time. So, yeah, I mean, that's what I'd say. That the focus is on the day-to-day work, and that is a coaching cliche thing. But I think the Vikings, they're not going to make any final decisions until they have to. That's the way that this that's the way that this infrastructure has started to operate and wants to operate moving forward. um Carl from Lake Elmo, not to get ahead of ourselves, but for fun, if Kyler plays really well this year, do you see a scenario where the Vikings re-sign him to a longer deal and trade JJ? Or has this always just been a one-year stopgap regardless of play? No, I mean, look, this is pie in the sky thinking. If Kyler is spectacular and the Vikings win 13 games and they win a playoff game, I mean, like, you're going to have an extremely hard time letting that guy walk out of the building. That's just how it should work, given the importance of the quarterback position to NFL team success and the direct correlation there. As far as what that would mean for JJ, I mean, again, it's a value question. It is a how does he look question. It is how much do you care about depth question. It is what does the team and locker room feel about question. Like, there are a lot of and what does his camp think or want. I mean, that's the other component. It goes back to the previous question of would the Vikings trade JJ? I mean, I think it becomes a question of, you know, how ready is JJ? How ready would he be for a new start, or is he okay being a team player in that instance? And what does his agent Brian Aralt think about that? Like, that's the most important question. And until there's clarity with that stuff, like I think the speculation for me is just frankly it's just pretty unwarranted. Let's see what else. Um, K. Delisle contract status of front office people, and any options Teasley might bring with him. I mean, I think like that's kind of it's going to be a question that's going to be asked Wednesday. I think that's kind of a TBD type of answer. I do know, yeah, there were some front office folks whose contracts, I'd say they're just in a lot of Brett, there were some contracts that raised some questions about future, but as far as Seattle, I mean, very few people leave that place because of how great it is to work for John Schneider and the latitude those people have. And so, yeah, I mean, I would imagine that any type of person Nolan Teasley wants to bring over, the Seahawks really value. And so that it becomes an interesting one. But like, I do think the other component of it is you think about, I think there's been a perception of the Vikings hired Nolan Teasley, who's like a super scout draft wizard. And I think, like, you talk to anybody in Seattle even, and they'll tell you like that doesn't even categorize John Schneider. I mean, like, the scouting process is not like a lot of people can watch the tape and discern what type of player is what. But the secret sauce is really the information of, do you have relationships with agents? Do you have relationships with college coaches and personnel people who will tell you the real about who these players are and how much they care and how driven they are? Like, that is the secret sauce in the evaluation. And that's why the people you hire and their ability to acquire that information really matters. All right, we'll do one more fun one and then hop out of here. Craig Moshkow, Caleb Banks' health, rumors, speculation. Where is he at this point, timing wise? Yeah, from my understanding, I mean, nothing's really changed with Caleb Banks in that I'm looking at the beginning of training camp as, that's when you start to ask the questions of, is he going to be out there? How much is he going to be out there? But I mean, we've only been out there, the media has, for one specific practice, so I haven't seen a lot of anything, and I definitely haven't seen a lot of him. Definitely haven't seen him on the field, but he has been present. He has been working out, and all signs seem to continue to point to kind of that timeline. So if anything changes, I'll obviously be writing about it and let you guys know and be talking about it. But until we get to that point, I don't think, anything earlier than that would be like, wow, ahead of timeline for certain. So, yeah, that should probably do it for this iteration of the Alec Lewis Show. It's episode 173. Appreciate all of you who toss along questions. We'll be back later this week, probably Thursday evening, with some more after the press conferences. Obviously, we'll be back with some thoughts from on the field workouts, and can't wait for all of that. For those of you, again, who are new here, please hit the subscribe button on YouTube, on Apple, Spotify, or iHeart. Give us some stars, rate us, review us, all of that stuff. We appreciate First Resource Bank for their support and presenting sponsorship. We appreciate ProMN as well for their partnership. Unreal, the clothing brand. And with that, we will talk to you very, very soon.